Good evening. Clarence Tong here. Happy New Year, and thank you for joining us for our January live stream program. I am starting my 8th year as chair of the Alexandria Democratic Committee, and I would like to thank our ADC membership for trusting me to lead our party. One of the things I've learned is that no 2 years are the same, and 2021 will prove to be no different. We know that 2021 will be a very busy election year with consequential local and state races. However, due to COVID, it will still pose challenges to campaigning, and the impact of the ongoing redistricting process on the 2021 elections still remains unclear. We have heard nothing official yet, but there is a wide expectation that this year's redistricting process could delay the 2021 House of Delegate primaries and possibly other elections. Due to this uncertainty, it will be important for all of us to be nimble and prepared. We are already in close contact with the Alexandria Registrar Office and working to be prepared for any election scenario. And for those who are planning to run for office, I hope you will also consider building in a longer possible primary scenario into your campaign budgeting and planning process. You can also find specific candidate bulletins and instructions to get started on the Virginia Board of Election website or through the City of Alexandria's Office of Voter Registration and Elections. We will strive to keep you posted with the latest information and timeline from the State Board of Election as we receive it and in our subsequent live stream programs. To quickly recap, at the state level, Virginia will have elections in 2021 for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, as well as the Virginia House of Delegates. The current Democratic primary date set is Tuesday, June 8th. Here in the city, there will be elections for mayor, city council, and school board, as well as 2 constitutional offices, Commonwealth's attorney and sheriff. With the exception of school board, which is a nonpartisan election, the other Democratic primaries are also expected for Tuesday, June 8th. Before we start our program tonight, I also want to let you know about our next ADC business meeting, which will be on Monday, January 11th, and we'll be holding it virtually via Zoom. At that meeting, we will continue to vote in new ADC members, as well as consider several pending resolutions. Please keep an eye out for an email in the next few days regarding the resolutions and our amendment process. Amendments will need to be pre-filed by Sunday, January 10th, and be added to our meeting agenda. Our first speaker this evening is Senator Adam Ebbin, who will provide a General Assembly outlook. Adam is a longtime ADC member, and since 2012, he has represented the 30th Senate District, which includes a large portion of the city of Alexandria. Adam serves as a member of the Commerce and Labor, Finance and Appropriations, Transportation, General Laws and Technology, and Privileges and Elections Committee. So welcome, Senator Ebbin.
Thank you. Thanks, Clarence, and thanks for all you're doing to keep our party running smoothly during this pandemic. And I also want to give a shout out to Ricardo, who's made this production so smooth and professional. But I did want to talk about the 2021 General Assembly session. And it's a strange one with COVID. The House of Delegates, as met during the special session this past summer, they're meeting virtually. The Senate is planning on meeting in person at the Science Museum. And I'm hoping that we'll be taking even more safety precautions. Sadly, we lost a colleague, Senator Ben Chafin, to COVID just a few days ago, which was a big loss to not just to his region, but to the Senate as a whole. I've told people that Senator Chafin, even though we would disagree on some pretty ideological issues, when he spoke, he always spoke passionately and intelligently and authoritatively to the point where you would really listen and understand his point of view, even if you might not end up voting with him all times. In the end, you could certainly understand the Commonwealth as a whole better because of Ben Chafin. So this coming session is scheduled to be our shorter session. The Constitution calls for it to be 30 days with the possibility of being extended by a 2/3 vote, which is what's happened since the 1970s. But our Republican colleagues say that they do not want to extend because of a special session that we held this summer on criminal justice reform and COVID. But there's still a lot of policy areas to be addressed. And there's also the possibility the governor can call a special session if 30 days proves not to be long enough. We'll be working on the second year of our 2-year budget and making decisions about new federal aid dollars received. We'll be talking about education. The pandemic has highlighted inequities in the education system even more than previously, both regionally and demographically. In terms of housing, I'll have a bill to protect people from illegal evictions. And we want to take proactive steps to create affordable housing. The governor has allocated a significant amount in his budget for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I'll be introducing legislation to legalize marijuana, which will be complicated. We want to create a regulated adult use market for cannabis while still keeping it away from children. And while we do that, we want to provide some equity in our license structure and otherwise, and with the proceeds from dedicated revenue for communities that have been hurt from the war on drugs. So there's a lot to that. And I went to a medical dispensary just last week in Manassas to see how they're faring right now. We may be having some additional criminal justice reform measures that were not resolved during the marathon special session this summer and fall. In terms of elections law, we're likely to codify actions that we took through the budget during the special session and that increase access to the ballot box, things like drop boxes and what's called ballot curing. This will be a year that will consider constitutional amendments, which is a 2-year process to adopt a constitutional amendment in Virginia. It has to be passed by the General Assembly once before an election. And then the following year after the election, at least for the House of Delegates, they can be reconsidered. And if they pass again through the General Assembly, they then go to the voters. And we'll see legislation to remove Virginia's inoperable language restricting marriages to just a man and a woman. And instead, I intend to put in legislation that would make it clear that adults have the right to marry people of same gender or opposite gender. And we'll also see legislation to allow for the automatic reenfranchisement of felons. We'll deal with local issues. In Alexandria, we have an issue of flooding, and I'm going to be putting in legislation to making it more flexible for the city to use their flooding funding to help private homeowners. We'll also see other election legislation like the National Popular Vote Compact I'll be carrying again. And we will see legislation on data privacy, cleaner cars, all kinds of things. So it's likely to be a frenetic session focused on a lot of core government services and critical policy decisions. And we need to continue on the trajectory of progressive change that we've enjoyed this year. In order to do that, we'll need to hold the House of Delegates and our statewide offices. And I know you're going to hear from some candidates for statewide office. So that is my preview. And I don't know if you had any questions for me, Clarence, as before I turn over to our next guest.
Sure, Senator Evans. Thanks again for joining us tonight. There's been quite a bit of interest in the dates for the primary election. We've got also all of our local elections up this year, and I was just wondering if you could share any insight, based on what you know about what the General Assembly might do with regards to that schedule.
Sure. Well, the Code of Virginia calls for the elections, the primary elections, both for local offices, the statewide offices, and even for the House of Delegates to be on the second Tuesday in June, which would be Tuesday, June 8th. However, because of this is a census year that we're getting information from the census and new districts are being drawn, or adjustments to existing districts, it's quite likely that you would see emergency legislation that would postpone the primary for the House of Delegates to August. That's been what's happened in the past. And I would anticipate that, but I can't say for sure. People will have a really good sense of what's being proposed by January 13th, a week from Wednesday, when we're in session. You would see most of the bills introduced. And it's possible people will try and adjust the primary dates, but the only one that I anticipate changing would be the House of Delegates.
And any idea, like, what that time frame might look like? I know that in
the past it's been the second Tuesday in August, but a lot of this has to do with when the census data is available and the new redistricting commission getting the districts out there. I just saw a tweet earlier about some federal delays to the census data. So we should know more by next month at this time.
Well, yeah, thank you for your providing an update on that. Certainly something that's been on everybody's mind. While we have you on, I had heard that you were working on filing a marijuana-based legislation. Can you speak a little bit more about what you're doing in that?
Sure, and our next guest may want to address it as well, because she's been part of the discussions in the Senate on how we construct that bill. It's pretty complicated to start a new industry, which is really what it would be. We have to devise a code to provide for the licensure of people to grow cannabis, process cannabis, wholesale it, test it to make sure there's no additives in it and what strength it is, and finally to retail the cannabis. And we know there's been a lot of damage been done inordinately, particularly to people of color, by the war on drugs in the marijuana area. And there's an effort to try and see that we can perhaps provide some benefits, financially or otherwise, to that community. So it's going to be kind of complicated, but we're going to do our best to right some wrongs at the same time as seeing that people are not further penalized for adults for recreational use of marijuana.
Got it. A question from our Facebook Live, Senator Eben. This is from John. A lot of us are concerned about what seems to be a slow rollout of the COVID vaccine. Can you tell us anything about that? And if it stays slow, what's the best way to make it known that we'd like to see an improvement?
Well, I'm not involved in the rollout of the vaccine. I think that you're seeing problems around the country with it being available as quickly as anticipated. The state's role in the state health department is prioritizing who gets the vaccine first. And I hope that there's a speedy delivery of the vaccine to those people. I believe the first people are people in assisted living. And I believe stage 2 was for people above 75 years of age. And then those with underlying conditions, if I'm not mistaken. But they can contact the governor's administration, the Department of Health more specifically. And we have a pretty good website and dashboard about COVID in Virginia. I haven't checked it lately to see what it says about vaccinations. But I'm afraid we're not getting it out as quickly as some people may have hoped. But I'm hoping that they'll be able to work some things out. And I know President-elect Biden has said it's going to be a priority to have rapid delivery of the vaccine during his administration.
Yeah, I imagine that'll be a
top priority. And I should say the governor is going to have a press conference this week with more information. I don't know what day that press conference is, but the governor has a Facebook page where his news conferences are broadcast, and that's a good place to subscribe.
Yeah, for sure. And we'd be happy to send around a link to that as well. A final question, Senator Eben. As you know, lots of Alexandrians are quite active in policy advocacy. And with COVID, how can we be engaged?
Well, That's a pretty broad question. I mean, I welcome your communications to my office. I can always be emailed at district30@senate.virginia.gov. I have a weekly newsletter that I put out during the legislative session. If people want to subscribe, they can go to my website at adamebben.com. But it's important that we hear from you, and hear especially if there are things that are supposed to be happening that are breaking down. So feel free to contact me, and we do our best to respond as rapidly as we can.
Sure. Just a finer point on that, I know that many of us, used to go down during the General Assembly session to the, to visit with members, and it's a pretty small space over there ultimately, for so many members. I'm guessing that's not going to happen like that this year.
No, the Pocahontas building, which is the office building that Senator McClellan and Delegate Guzman and I are in, is closed just to members and staff. In fact, we were just talking about this in my office today. I'm just going to have one staff member. I have two, but there'll only be one in that office building and one working remotely. But a lot of us have found the opportunity to, via Zoom and communications like this, to be in touch with constituents. And I know I'm speaking with the Alexandria Chamber of Commerce next week, and I spoke with AAUW today, and a lot of community groups have expressed interest in Zoom meetings. We'll be having at least one or two Zoom town halls during the session, and that's another way. If you have a group that's large enough to do that, depending on the schedule. You mentioned I've got a number of committees, but there's oftentimes if we're not in a committee or in session, where I can try and schedule a meeting.
Well, Senator Ebben, thanks again for joining us today to kind of share what you know about the upcoming General Assembly session, and being accessible to the constituents here. I would say a lot of folks on the call are probably your constituents. So really appreciate your hard work, and look forward to staying in touch with you during the session.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Adam. So tonight, we continue our efforts to allow you to hear directly from the Democratic candidates running for statewide offices. Our next speaker is Senator Jennifer McClellan, who is seeking the Democratic nomination for Virginia governor. And Jennifer has been long involved in the Democratic Party of Virginia, starting off as a young Dem, and more recently, Senator McClellan served. She serves in the Senate, but before that, for 11 years in the House of Delegates, representing her Richmond district. Senator McClellan has a long list of legislative accomplishments, including and creating a health exchange under the Affordable Care Act, as well as the passage of the recent historic Clean Economy Act, just to name a few. So welcome, Jennifer. Thanks so much for joining the ADC tonight.
Thank you for having me, Clarence, and thank you all. I wish that we could be together in person, and hopefully we will be very soon. But it is a pleasure to be here to talk to you a bit about my campaign for governor. And to tell you why I'm running for governor, first, I really need to tell you why I got interested in government and politics to begin with. And it really goes back to my parents, who grew up in the segregated South during the Depression, and listening to their stories of throughout their life, listening to my grandparents' stories, my great-grandparents' stories, and my own love of history, I came to understand at a very young age that government at its best is a force for progressive change and solving people's problems and helping getting through crises. At its worst, it is a force that oppresses some for the benefit of others. And at 11, I decided I want to do whatever I can to make government that force for progressive change and solving problems. Now, I didn't know what that meant at 11. But as Clarence said, when I went to college, I joined the Young Democrats. That was 30 years ago this year. And I've volunteered on campaigns every year since, even now that I am an elected official. because it's very important to me that we really are a government by, of, and for the people, but we haven't been for all the people. And so as a lawyer, as a community activist, as a young Democrat, as an older Democrat, I've done what I could to make government that force for change, and eventually decided to run for office myself when my delegate, Viola Baskerville, ran for lieutenant governor. And I realized I wanted to be the one making the change. So for the past 15 years, 14 of them in the minority, I've been focused on expanding access to healthcare, improving our education system from early childhood to career, because I understand that is a critical component to economic opportunity, economic development, healthy, thriving communities, and a healthy, thriving democracy, as we've seen in the past 4 years. I've focused on addressing climate change, protecting a woman's access to reproductive health. All of the issues we care about as Democrats, I've been in the trenches fighting on for 14 years in the minority. But thanks to you, we got the majority this year, and boy, did we know how to use it. But I started to think about running for governor, frankly, last year, because while Virginia was doing pretty well overall, too many communities and too many Virginians were being left behind. We have structural inequity in just about all of our systems. And I saw it in the education system, in the healthcare system, you name it, there's inequity. And I wanted to begin to address that inequity while times were good. But then COVID hit. COVID has exacerbated that inequity, but it also laid it bare. And as we sat at home after the murder of George Floyd on the internet, and that inequity was laid bare, I also really started to realize that I'm fighting the same fights today in 2021 that my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents fought. And as I sat in the pain of living through the aftermath of George Floyd's murder and the protests, I realized I can't look my kids in the eye and tell them I did everything I could to keep them from fighting these same fights if I'm not willing to step up and do everything within my power to solve those problems and solve that inequity for them and everybody else's children. And so I am running for governor to rebuild our economy, to rebuild our healthcare and economic safety nets, to rebuild our education system in a way that addresses inequity, in a way that recognizes trends that COVID has accelerated and changes that are going to be permanent as a result of COVID that need to be managed. But frankly, to also rebuild the trust that a lot of Virginians have lost in government's ability to understand their problems, let alone solve them. And as in addition to any policy that I focus on as governor, and my priorities will remain pretty much what they've been, and what I just said, but system-wise, we have got to have a government that reflects the full diversity of our Commonwealth. We have to have a government that does not just create a seat at the table for marginalized voices and groups and individuals that haven't had a seat at the table, but take the table out into our communities. Because again, I have believed since I first started thinking about government, I believed we were a government by, of, and for the people. But government is only as good as the people who participate. And I want to be sure that we are reflective of the full diversity and centering the needs of all Virginians. So that's why I'm running. And I'm excited to talk about whatever questions you have, whatever issues and specifically you all want to talk about. I'm just really excited to dialogue with you guys tonight.
Great. Senator McClellan, thanks so much for joining us here tonight. We do have Facebook Live open and people can ask questions. They're going to be moderated, of course, as we receive them. But I guess I'll start off, Senator McClellan. I mean, COVID has probably turned campaigning on its head. What can you kind of tell us about what it's like to campaign during this time?
It is definitely weird. But to be honest, I realized as a Black woman that there was no playbook for me anyway. And to the extent there were traditional playbooks, they started to get shredded with the election of Donald Trump. And now COVID has just completely set them on fire. So we've had to adjust and do things virtually. We have been able to do, up until the numbers started going up, some minimal in-person or hybrid events. But it's harder to get out in front of crowds and to meet people and be everywhere, because I don't want to leave any part of the Commonwealth behind. But the basics are still the same, and that is we are going to build a very robust grassroots organization, so that it's not just me out sharing my vision and my message, but we are empowering the people, my endorsers, the grassroots, to the field organization, to spread that message in their communities as well. In some ways it's good. I get to sleep with, at home, put my kids to bed every night. But at the same time, my favorite parts of campaigning, which is out meeting people where they are in their communities, is limited. So we're adjusting. We had the benefit of watching how 2020 candidates adjusted, learning what worked and what, but it is definitely weird.
I can certainly imagine that. I have a policy question for you, Senator. The ADC has a very strong labor caucus effort. It's been meeting every week since the pandemic started to help families in need. It was actually formed originally around rejecting this constitutional amendment to codify a right to work in the Virginia Constitution. And I was just wondering whether you supported ending right to work, and what the advocates can do.
So I remember that constitutional amendment, and I was a big part of the fight to defeat it. And a big part of why we were able to defeat it was nobody really understood it. That's been the same challenge we have with repealing it, is most people don't fully understand. And Republicans have done a really good job of framing right to work solely as, should union membership be a choice? But right to work is more than that. And I do believe that union membership should be a choice. But I also believe that if you are employed somewhere where you have a union, you have a collective bargaining agreement, you benefit from that collective bargaining agreement, you benefit from representation from the union in grievances, that you should have to contribute to the cost to get that collective bargaining agreement. And I believe that we should remove barriers to collective bargaining, and barriers to organizing. Now, so that's where I am on right to work, is I would want to be sure that any bill repealing right to work makes clear union membership is a choice. And frankly, that is rooted in some pretty ugly history from the early part of the century, where many Black laborers weren't allowed to join unions. And then when they moved into areas that had closed shops, they couldn't get jobs. And so I would want to make sure that union membership remains a choice. But again, if I believe in the labor movement, I believe in the power of collective bargaining, and I believe that we should remove any barriers to it and make sure that anyone who benefits from collective bargaining has to contribute to it.
Got it. I think we have time for one more question, Senator. And it's back to an electoral one. It seems like there's a growing, robust field of candidates for governor this year. What do you see as kind of making you stand out in your path to winning the Democratic nomination?
Virginia is ready for the next generation of leadership, but someone who can get things done and has the experience to get things done. And I think what makes me stand out is I have been working on these issues and have quite a bit of success on these issues, and fully understand, especially addressing the inequity that I talked about. I fully understand how Virginia got where it is today. I fully understand what needs to be done, not only to address that inequity, but to rebuild in a way that doesn't leave anyone behind. I've built the relationships, I've built the connections, not just on the policy side, not just in state government, but throughout the party. I had the benefit of my special election to the Senate being the first one in a post-Trump era. And I was able to harness the energy of a lot of new people who got engaged as a result of Trump, in reaction to Trump, and bridge the gap between them and the party infrastructure and the party establishment. So I am building a campaign, a robustly diverse campaign that meets the voters where they are, that meets people where they are, and frankly listens empathetically and includes them in creating the solutions to their problems. And that's a new type of leadership. And that's the kind of leadership that I will bring. That's the perspective that I will bring as a Black woman who has been able to navigate this system and know where it's broken and where it needs to be fixed. That's what sets me apart from the other candidates.
Great. We just had one other question come in. Hopefully, a quick one for you. And you talked about trying to build a very inclusive campaign. We have some advocates within our committee that are very focused on making sure disabled people have access, and in particular, one gentleman very focused on autism. Anything you can say about kind of your commitment to the disabled?
Yes, I mean, I think in a way, past has been prologue. On the policy level, I have been very focused on not only removing barriers to the disabled community, but addressing policies that disproportionately impact. And in the interest of time, I'll focus on the school to prison pipeline. I put in a bill that proved what we already knew, and that is that students with disabilities, and particularly autism, ADHD, et cetera, where 1 in 5 kids have them, they're disproportionately impacted by long-term suspensions, expulsions, and referrals to law enforcement. I put the bill in place that quantified that by requiring school divisions to report their discipline data by demographics, including disabilities. And then we put in legislation to fix it on the discipline side. And this session in particular, eliminating the crime of disorderly conduct for behavior at a school or school-sponsored event, because it was being used to charge, and these are true stories, an autistic kid who kicked a trash can on the way to the principal's office with a misdemeanor. So that's one example. I could give you many more, but in the interest of time, on the policy side, but showing up and making sure that you make government accessible to everyone, including the disabled, is the first step, so that their concerns, their issues are centered, listened to, and addressed. And I'm very committed to doing that as governor.
Great. Well, Senator McClellan, thanks again for joining us today, and wish you the best of luck in this campaign.
Thank you, and you guys, Happy New Year.
So our final speaker tonight is Delegate Elizabeth Guzman, who's running for Virginia Lieutenant Governor. Elizabeth has served as a member of the Virginia House of Delegates since 2018, where she defeated an entrenched Republican. At that time, she was also elected the freshman class president and is one of the first ever Latinas to be elected to the General Assembly. And Delegate Guzman is no stranger to Alexandria. She has worked as a member of the city staff and has participated in our ADC Labor Caucus as well. She's very active in Democratic Party activities, is an elected member of the DNC, and has held various leadership positions through the Biden-Harris campaign this past year. Before we get started, Elizabeth, I just wanted to say that we were really happy to hear that you hired James Conway to serve as your campaign manager. I don't know if you know, but James started off as a field organizer for the Clinton-Kaine campaign back in 2016, working in Alexandria, and we're just so proud of him. So Elizabeth, thanks again for being here today, and welcome back to the ADC.
Thank you, Clarence. Thank you so much for your kind words and for the shout out to my amazing campaign manager, James Conway. So, good evening, Alexandria Democrats. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I am Elizabeth Guzman, and I proudly represent the 31st District in the House of Delegates, which includes parts of Prince William and Fauquier counties. But many people know me as the third delegate from Alexandria because I proudly work for the city. I'm a social worker, a public administrator, a union sister, a mother to 4 children, an immigrant, and a fighter for working people and progressive values. And I'm very excited to be here with you tonight as I talk about my bid to become the first woman and the first Latinx person to serve as your next lieutenant governor. I wanted to share with you a little bit about my story. When I first came to this country with $300 and a little girl, I worked 3 minimum wage jobs to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. I put myself through Northern Virginia Community College, and I eventually earned 2 master's degrees. I work in the Fairfax County Public School system as well, and the Fairfax Office for Children. And later, I built a career as a social worker, protecting children from neglect and abuse. And I now work for the City of Alexandria, Department of Adult Services, where I oversee a $20 million budget for a 200-person operations staff, serving some of our most vulnerable populations, including seniors struggling with food insecurity and people with substance abuse disorders. And I first became engaged in politics as an activist back in 2006, when Corey Stewart was trying to bring the 287G program to Prince William County, which deputizes local law enforcement officers to act as agents of ICE. It is a program that leads to racial profiling of the Latinx community. And what I remember most about fighting this program was that it was not only the Latinx community by itself, it was a true multiracial coalition. And I remember Senator Tim Kaine joining us. And this year, when we finally ended it, our Black brothers and sisters joined us and protested as well. And we stood with them this summer to say that Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor deserve justice. We as Democrats and as Americans are stronger when we stand with and for each other. But I never thought I would run for office until Hillary lost in 2016. My son, Carlos, who was 9 years old at the time, told me that we had to go back to my native Peru because Donald Trump didn't like people who spoke Spanish. So I filed to run for the House of Delegates so that I could show my son and Virginia and others that Virginia is his home and that Guzman is an American name. And I won't go into detail, but there were some people who asked me, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this with your job in Alexandria and your kids? How are you going to raise $1 million? But I did it, not once, but twice. And I did not let that bother me because as a brown woman, as an immigrant with an accent, I'm used to being underestimated. But there are some good things about being underestimated. It forces you to work harder and be better because the bar is higher. And then when you exceed people's expectations, they are like, wow, I did not see that coming. And I'm very proud of what we accomplished over the last 4 years, which brings me to why I decided to run for lieutenant governor. Because first and foremost, I view the role of lieutenant governor as a promotion for an effective legislator, a leader who has delivered on the promises they have made. I have passed 19 bills and introduced many more in the areas of healthcare, workers' rights, the environment, education, and criminal justice reform. I'm currently serving as the chair of the Social Services Subcommittee and the vice chair of the Education Committee. In 2020, the Virginia Education Association, which represents more than 40,000 teachers and support professionals, named me the Legislator of the Year. And I'm proud of the historic investments we have made in public education, including raising teacher pay, and I fought to reduce the caseloads of school counselors and special education aides. And I was proud to work with the First Lady in the large investment we recently made in the area of early childhood education. And I was also named a legislative leader by the League of Conservation Voters for fighting for policies to protect the environment and hold corporate polluters accountable. And I have built a strong record on progressive values by standing up and speaking truth to power. And I'm proud of the progress that we have made. But my struggle of many years ago is still the struggle of many people in Virginia. There are 1.2 million Virginians, including 2/3 of our frontline workers, who have no access to paid sick days. And that is why I've introduced a paid sick days bill every single year, but it has not gotten through the Senate Commerce and Labor Committee. Your Senator Adam Evan, voted for it. And I want to thank him, Senator Adam Evan, for voting for workers. And I'm proud to be working with him on his bill and be his voice in the House to ban private prisons in Virginia. But I'm not giving up. And I am introducing paid sick days bill for our essential workers in the next session. And I'm running for lieutenant governor because I'm ready to be a progressive voice for working families in the Senate. Because if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that healthcare is a human right and we need paid sick days for all Virginians. And this pandemic has also taught us that it's important to be listening to the people, especially the essential workers who are actually doing the job. And as we think about how are we going to safely reopen schools, we need to make sure teachers have a seat at the table through collective bargaining rights. And I'm very proud to have passed that historic legislation that lifted Virginia's blanket ban on public sector collective bargaining and will allow localities like Alexandria to opt in to giving their teachers a voice on the job. Tonight, I'm humbly asking you to join Team Guzman because the 2021 election is going to require a strong Democrat, someone who can build coalitions, a progressive Democrat who's willing to listen and fight unapologetically for the values that we care about the most. I know this because I did it as the co-chair of the Bernie Sanders Virginia campaign and as a member of the Joe Biden's National Latino Leadership Council. If we're going to protect our Democratic trifecta, we need someone who can unite our party, someone who can listen. Why? Because we have so much work to do. Recover from this pandemic, achieve racial justice, expand healthcare for all, and build a Virginia that is number one, not only for business, but also for workers. And if you join me, you'll be in good company. I'm proud to share that I was just endorsed by CASA in Action, which is the largest electoral organization fighting for immigrants' rights in the Mid-Atlantic. And I'm also the only candidate in the lieutenant governor's race that have been endorsed by 2 labor unions and more to come. So I hope I can count on your support in the June primary. And now I'm happy to take any questions.
Delia Guzman, thanks so much for joining us here tonight and sharing your vision for your campaign and for Virginia. You may know that within our membership, we have lots of people are very engaged in politics and doing the grassroots work. And I asked like a similar question of Senator McClellan, who was here right before you. What's it like, campaigning statewide during the COVID pandemic? And what can you tell us about like what your campaign may look like moving forward this year?
Thank you, Clarence, for that question. Well, I think I have mentioned before that this campaign is not going to be about one region of Virginia. We're committed to reach out to every single zip code, not only in Northern Virginia, but in Central Virginia, Southwest, Southside, and Virginia Beach. And as much as I miss, being out there and shaking hands and share my message in person, I could say that campaigning in virtual environment have allowed me to visit many places. We have visited more than 20 counties already, and we have more to come. And I think it's been easier. Like, for example, on Saturday, I was in Louisa County, and then in the afternoon, I was in Prince William County, something that I would not be able to do in the regular world. But we are committed to put the work. I am part of the grassroots. I was the co-founder of the Indivisible Nova West here in Prince William County, when we recognized that in order for us to build momentum in Prince William County, we needed to engage voters from the western side. And my campaign is going to be run by grassroots and led by grassroots. We're going to be making phone calls. We're going to be, of course, campaigns need to communicate. So you may want to have to also receive a phone call from me because we're going to need some money to communicate our message of progress. But we're committed to put that work hard. It's been always that way for me in my case since I decided to run for office. And we are going to work extremely hard trying to reach as many voters as we can.
Well, it sounds like quite a task this year. Glad you're taking it on. I have a policy question for you that came in through our Facebook Live chat, Delegate Guzman. And this is from Marta. I'd love to hear Elizabeth's plan for climate. How will she work with Dominion to ensure renewables are supported, and how will she improve environmental justice across the state?
Absolutely. Very good question. I think that I would start by saying that I signed a pledge not to take money from Dominion. And for the class of 2017, a class that I proudly led, where I think close to after the first session, 15 out of the 16 members of my class decided to sign that pledge. And the reason was very simple. We decided that if we wanted to regulate and wanted to bring change to Virginians to protect the environment, we could not be receiving their money to be biased. We do talk to them, and I could tell you that as an elected official, we need to be listening to all the sides of the issue. So I do meet when we're talking about environmental policy and we're talking about, I have to meet with every single stakeholder in the room because that's what we are elected for. So I think that going forward, we had the first step towards renewables, which is that by 2035, we will be 100% renewable. And I know that many people was not happy with that we wanted to more. But I want everybody to think for a moment that we were, for 26 years under a Republican leadership, where they were not willing to compromise on anything. And many of these bills were killed on party line, were PBI'd or killed, or sometimes never get out of committee where we could cast our votes. So I was very proud to support that. But if I tell you that that's over, no, it's not. We have so much to do, and we still have to make sure to be committed to get 100% renewables sooner rather than later. I was able also, on that regard, I serve as the chair of the of the Southern region for the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators, where I represent 11 states, Hispanic legislators from 11 states. And I was able to pass the Green New Deal, but I didn't call it the Green New Deal. I call it just policies to protect the environment. And I passed it in a resolution with unanimous support because people really believe on the concept and what they wanted to accomplish. So I think I could count that also on my environmental policy. As far as an environmental justice, we need to accept, that these issues of climate, or when we're talking about the building of pipelines, how there's an intersectionality in between the decision where we locate those pipelines and where they are going to be located. And it has to be, unfortunately, communities of color. So I think that that's something that we need to accomplish. We need to realize that environmental justice includes fighting for Virginians from every zip code, and there is other ways to protect the environment that doesn't have to be through pipelines, and we have to address the needs for those zip codes that have been forgotten. And that includes increasing the minimum wage. That includes, providing paid sick days that disproportionately affect communities of color as well. And I'm carrying a legislation this year that is going to address gold mining, that I'm partnering with the residents of Rockingham County, which were impacted by the Atlantic Coast pipelines.
Well, thank you for that very comprehensive answer on environmental policy and the importance of addressing climate. And I just had one final question for you, Delegate Guzman. It's another one on the political front, I guess. Back in the past election, we saw the other side attack Democrats as being socialists. Obviously that has made the news here in Virginia because they were definitely running ads against candidates, particularly in swing districts, with that message. This is kind of a question that also came in through the chat from Paul. Like, since you had led Bernie's campaign here in Virginia, do you see, I guess, the Democratic Socialist brand as being contentious to voters? Like how would you define yourself?
Well, I would say that I've been a proudly Bernie supporter since 2016. And that has never, taken any points away. And the reason why I supported him was because I believe in his message of protecting the environment. I believe in his message of climate, protecting the environment, fighting for climate change, to increase the $15 an hour, to provide the rights for teachers to collective bargaining. And all of those conversations used to be like myth within the Democratic Party. So, however, I think that as Democrats, and these were values that actually we need to remember that the Democratic Party was built by unions. And as Elizabeth Warren said, it's going to take unions to rebuild the Democratic Party. And when we talk about increasing the minimum wage, when we're talking about fighting for the working class, we're talking about democratic values, because everyone, every American and every Virginian should deserve the right to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how much money they make, of the color of their skin. As a Democrat and a strong Democrat, we all have to believe in the primary process, and I think I proudly support Bernie Sanders, and it was my commitment immediately to join the Biden campaign. And maybe for that reason, the Biden campaign selected me to be part of their national Latino leadership, because there was so much division in 2016. So now in 2020, my role was to bring, push the progressive agenda in the Biden campaign, but also, to unite the party where everyone has to have a voice at the table. Not only the moderates, conservatives, the leftists, it's the Democrats, and that's our role. As far as being branded as socialists or communists, I think it's very important, to have an answer to your questions. And I, being used that not once, but twice in my candidacy, and that never worked, because the answer is what I told you today. I will continue to fight to protect the environment. I will continue to fight to increase the minimum wage. I will continue to fight for paid sick days. I will continue to fight to repeal the right to work. And if that makes me a socialist to protect the working class, so be it. But I think that we Democrats are the party of the working class, and I'll be proud to standing up and speaking out to protect the working class.
Well, thank you, Delegate Guzman. I think we would all agree that Dems need to do a much better job at messaging and, being able to talk about things that the values that we support and policies that we support. So I definitely commend you for, your efforts.
I would tell you, Clarence, that, all of that negativity, I'm very optimistic about the future. In that, because I know that there are some theories that anytime we have a Democratic president in the White House, that we lose state legislatures. However, I would disagree. I'm optimistic about the future, because the majority in the House of Delegates and in the Senate, we have a little bit more work to do, have delivered in policies that Virginia care about the most, and I think we deliver in every single promise. So I think the future, as we continue to fight for those values that are our democratic values, we're going to have a trifecta for years to come. But we're going to have to elect a strong leader that is willing to defend those positions, a proven leader, a person who can get things done.
For sure. I definitely think so. I think you're right. Final question, Delegate Guzman. This just came in through the Facebook Live feed. This is from Nancy Brown. Even with the support of the federal government and the General Assembly, we are facing an eviction crisis, even when the ban is lifted. And what can she's asking, what can you do as delegate to help prevent that?
Absolutely. Very good question. So I'm going to start by saying that when we concluded the special session this year, we didn't know what to expect from the federal government. They couldn't produce an answer on whether they are going to extend a moratorium on evictions or not. So we needed to act, and just be prepared for that. So our budget in Virginia extended that eviction moratorium through January 1st, 2021, before the federal government made a decision. And so I think that there's gonna be language in the budget where we think, whatever is ahead of us is uncertain. It's unknown, how we're gonna recover from this pandemic and how many people are being impacted by this. We're not only losing lives, but people are also losing their homes and losing their jobs and while being sick. So I think that a part of the language of the budget is going to include, it is our commitment to extend those through the beginning of the fiscal year 2022, which is June 30th of 2022. So because we think that that's how much it's going to take for us to recover, and these people will be in a comfortable place. And I use this opportunity, to share with you and to share with your neighbors, your friends and families, that in order to be eligible for this, you're gonna have to apply. It's just not given to you automatically. So I will invite you to visit www.stayhomevirginia.gov so you can find more information. But because you have to fill out an application and present that to your landlord, and sometimes we don't have that information available to the public, we had to do, more job doing community outreach.
Great. Well, thank you, Delegate Guzman, for sharing those resources. And that's actually all we have time for tonight. Thanks so much for joining us again and answering the questions and sharing your vision. And we wish you the best of luck in your campaign.
Thank you, Clarence. Happy New Year to everyone, to my Alexandria family. And I look forward to seeing you in the campaign. If you would like to follow us, please visit www.elizabethguzmanforvirginia.com. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. To everyone, thanks again for joining us for the ADC's January live stream. You may know that there are several very consequential elections tomorrow with the Georgia Senate runoffs, as well as 2 special General Assembly elections here in Virginia. If you're interested in helping out in these final hours, the campaigns can certainly use your help with phone banking, and we are happy to connect you if you'd like to help out. Thank you for all you do, and have a good night.